So Richard, I mean, the short name for Richard is Rich. Why does Rich hate rich people? What is it with you, Rich? I'm trying to figure you out.
Actually, I don't hate rich people. Some of my best friends are rich people. If you go to Harvard and Yale, you're surrounded by rich people. Even if I didn't want to have them as friends, I would have had little choice in those places. No, it's for me, the problem is not the individual. The problem is the system. And so I don't hate rich people at all. I feel kind of sad for them because they've worked many cases quite hard to get to be rich, imagining that that's what life is about. And then they get very disappointed along the way. And after 3 martinis, they tell me all about it.
So you think they're working too hard and they're not enjoying life. And because of that, they would be much happier if they work less. That's what you think.
Among other things, yeah, I think they'd be happier if not only if they worked less, but if the kind of work they did and the kind of relationships they had with other people in that work were different, they'd be an awful lot happier. And this is not just my opinion, that's what they've told me.
So let me ask you this. A lot of times in life, like for myself, obviously we were just talking about the painting behind me. Many times when you go back and you see somebody, how they form their opinions, there is a certain trail on how they got to it, right? How did you get to the opinions and beliefs that you have today? If you can go back and talk about, I was raised in a family, here's my mom and dad, this is what happened to me at this age. I kind of want to know the underlying motivation that led you to believe in what you believe in today.
Well, sure, I can give you some of the milestones, at least as best I've been able to make them out. I was born in Ohio in the Midwest. My father worked in a steel factory in Youngstown, Ohio. But when I was 5 years old, we moved east and we settled in a suburb of New York City called New Rochelle. You may know it. And it was a commuter town. My father took the train into New York City every day, worked really hard in the city, came home in the evening. Most of the people in New Rochelle were commuters like him. And so the train took about 35 minutes to get from New Rochelle into Grand Central Station. And when I went with my father, very important, we would pass on this train through Harlem, that part of New York City. And, looking like as a youngster, looking out the window, it was very easy for me to see 2 things. One, the people whose apartments, by the way, were often no more than 4, 5, 6 feet from where the train passed. I could see into their apartments because that's where the level of the train was. And I could see 2 things. One, that they were very poor. And number 2, that they were Black. These were very clear signs. Even a little kid could figure that out. And so I asked my father, what is that? Why are those people living like that? And my father, who was mostly a distant father and didn't give me all that much time, somehow felt that this was an important question and gave me a level of attention and concern that I'm sure was the most valuable thing about all of this. But he also explained to me that we live in a society which is fundamentally unfair to an awful lot of people. And for example, those poor people living crowded in those not real nice looking apartments, those are among the kinds of people that are not well treated, not given a fair shake in life. And I listened to him the way a child does. But, I went with him fairly often. He did take me.
How old were you at that time when he told you this? I'm curious.
I would say I was probably 9, 10,
oh, wow.
11 years of age.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And, I think I half understood what he was talking about. I loved the attention. And so, the way children do, the next time we went into New York, I made sure at around the same time to ask a variation of the same question so that we would have this conversation, which I very much enjoyed. And then, as I grew older, I began to get interested in basically understanding, the basic questions that came to me. Why are some nations rich and other ones poor? Why are some people rich and others poor? Why is the quality of life so different? New Rochelle is a suburb that has very poor and very rich people and a good number in between. So I was constantly reinforced in asking that kind of question.
Now, your pops, who was your dad's inspiration? Like if I were to ask, who was your dad's favorite president? Would you say FDR? Would you say who was he? Who was somebody that he admired and he liked?
I'm trying to think. I think the first person in this country, he was an immigrant. Let me go back. I was born in the United States.
Got it.
But neither my father nor my mother were. My father was French and my mother was German. So I grew up speaking French and German.
Nice.
I only learned English when they put me in the kindergarten and I had to speak it. So the first person my father I remember speaking highly of was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That person loomed large as a political leader who my father felt gave a damn about the average person, did a lot of things to help people in a very hard time, the Great Depression. And I remember hearing him talk very glowingly about FDR.
Now, when you think about that, when you say FDR, so for you, you've had your belief system since you were 9 years old. It's not like you're somebody where you say, I used to be a Republican, my parents were Republicans, and I decided, I realized that's not the way to go. So I went and studied, and then I became a socialist because I met a professor. You've had this belief system for 60 some years. You've had it for a long time.
I've had the belief system for a long time, but I've also entertained other belief systems. Partly, again, my father and my mother were very open-minded. They did not want me to be a parrot. They did not want me to parrot even their perspectives. So in my home, there hangs a photograph of my first political act, which is standing at the commuter train station in New Rochelle, New York, holding a sign that read, I like Ike, which was actually Eisenhower in the Republican race for president. And, you know, I had no problem doing that with my friends and my parents. They did ask me questions why I was doing it. Yeah. But I told them why, and that was my business to determine. So they've been very good about that. I've never felt, and I did the same with my two kids. It's not my job to shape your political ideas. I'm sure some of that happens no matter what we do, just
sure, of course,
name of it. But otherwise, I don't think that's appropriate any more than telling you what religious affiliation you ought to have or anything like that.
Do your kids have the same political beliefs as you?
I don't know if they're the same. In the way America works, they'd be left of center, but they're not the same. They're not.
So they're not as left as you maybe, but they're left of center.
They're left of center. My son, much less left. My daughter, closer to me in that perspective.
How old were you the first time you read Communist Manifesto?
16 or 17.
So did a school teacher give it, or did your pops or mom say read the book?
My father told me this is an important book for you to read. Given your interests, given your questions, given our conversations, here you're getting something that is very European. For someone who's been through the European schooling system,
a weird thing.
The American system was a continuing shock.
Yeah.
The fact that I'll give you an example. When I was young, when I went to high school, ninth grade, the first time, the way high school is set up in New York State, my father asked me about my classes in Latin and Greek. So I answered my father, there are no classes in Latin and Greek in my high school. He didn't believe me. He said, oh, you must be mistaken. The next day he went into the school with me, barged right into the principal's office. He was polite and all that, but he said, look, I want to talk to you about Latin and Greek. And the principal was a very nice guy. He brought me in there, so I, of course, had to be witness to all this. The principal said, we have never taught Greek in this high school, at least in the years I've been the principal. And we don't teach Latin unless four or more sets of parents were to demand it. If
four or more?
4 or more. If 4 or more want it, we will get a part-time teacher to offer it. My father then went around, found another 3 parents, and I learned Latin in school, but in a class of 4 students.
Wow.
Because there were only that many parents. I mean, my father stopped when he got 4, but that's how I learned. My father was always of the opinion that what was offered to and expected of American high school students was a scandal. It was not serious. For example, he gave me Plato and Aristotle to read. He gave me St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. We're not Catholic. It had nothing to do with that. But if he felt that an educated human being needs exposure to these great works, and he was aghast that the high school made no effort.
Now, let me ask you, how old were you the first time you read Wealth of Nations or Atlas Shrugged?
That was college. That would have been 3 or 4 years later. I read Adam Smith basically because I had a class, a freshman class at Harvard, that gave me, a few selected readings, 30, 40 pages worth of it. I found that so intriguing and so interesting because it was my question. Why are some, why are wealthy, the wealth of nations? Why do some have it and some don't?
Yep.
So it was a book that entranced me. I liked it. I learned from it. I've had respect for that work all my life and right to this moment. So that's when I encountered that.
And so when you read Wealth of Nations and you read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, both times when you were in college, did you at that point start debating the teacher? Did you kind of start defending more philosophies that were more from the altruism, more from the Karl Marx side? Or were you a debate guy from the moment you started reading these books? Or was it more just like, oh, wow, interesting, let me see what this is about?
No, I think I was more of a debater type. I wanted to fight. But to be real honest with you, and I'm assuming that's what you want, my teachers could not or would not answer more and more of my questions as I became a sophomore and a junior and a senior in college. And I could tell, because these were sometimes teachers I liked, sometimes teachers I didn't like on a personal level. But I could see that they couldn't answer my questions either because they didn't know what it was I was asking, or they knew, but it was frightening or scaring them to go into it. I could tell in some cases which of those it was. In others, I just guessed. But the level of discomfort that my questions would provoke made me back off. I didn't want to make these people's lives unpleasant. As I say, some of these were teachers I liked and I learned from.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a pain in their rear end, but I could see that my questions put them in a very uncomfortable place. So what I did was I didn't pursue it. I would ask a question. I tried to word it in a way that wasn't confrontational. And then when I got a very dissatisfying answer or no answer at all, I would literally, and I mean this, I would run to the library at the end of the class, bury myself in the library the way few other students did, and read myself silly trying to work out what a good answer to that question would have been that the teacher was unable or unwilling to do.
So the opposite answer of yours, not your answer. So meaning the answer to the question you were asking. As if the teacher was to answer a question that they didn't have, you'd go try to find the answer that they should have given.
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly what I tried to do.
So,
sometimes, but to be fair, I mean, I don't want to misspeak here. There were also cases where the teacher did give me an answer or kind of dismissed my question. That got me even more upset. And then I went to the library to reinforce my sense that I had a point to make here. There was some validity to what I was saying. And then I would learn that I was wrong in some areas, right in others. But, you get better educated if you're driven like that. If something is really important to you, you kind of read the article or you read the book in a different way from what you do if it's just an assignment in a course.
You're an April 1st baby. I mean, it makes sense, as an April 1st. My dad is April 10th, and my former COO was April 12th, and my best friend from the Army is April 9th. You guys are wired in a very interesting way. I hire April babies because I love them. It's interesting you say that. When I was a kid in Iran, my mom and dad would put me in a Bible study in Christian Sunday school, And I would always get kicked out of Sunday school. And because I would ask the weird questions, I said, if God loves us so much, why do we get bombed? Why do so many people died, and they had a hard time with me. They would say, sir, you got to keep your son out of this because he's confusing the other kids. So I was an atheist for 25 years of my life. But let's go back to a part that you brought up. You said your dad was a distant father, meaning he did his best, but he was a hard worker. So when you did drive up to Harlem with him, you used that as an opportunity to ask more questions. Looking back, did a part of your motivation come from a place where you read a book and you said, you know what, if my dad didn't have to work as hard as he did, I probably would have been able to spend more time with him. Did you ever process it that way or no?
Yes, I did. I was aware. I don't remember whether this happened to me, this recognition that you point to, in college or in graduate school, but one or the other, I had a very, very clear sense. And I became a little bit psychologically self-aware. I should put in parentheses, my wife is a psychotherapist and my daughter is also a psychotherapist.
Beautiful.
So I am surrounded by, I've been tutored in psychological understanding for many, many years by two people who are very close to me. But in any case, yes, I had a sense that my father, as an immigrant here in the United States, had to work very, very hard. All of his education in Europe, all of his connections, all of that was gone. All of that was left behind when he came here. He really had to start from nothing. He worked his rear end off. I do believe, not to be dramatic, that the heart attack that finally killed him was not unconnected to the anxieties of making it here, to the insufficiency of money. So yes, I had a personal way of feeling that this system had not treated my father or my mother very well. We were always, as a family, grateful that they could leave Europe and survive and come here. And my parents had an appreciation for the United States because it had saved them the way many others in their family had not been saved. But having said that, and not denying it, the level of education and the level of work imposed on people to even scratch out a basic living, I think it killed him, and I think it harmed him, and it made him less productive to this country than he could have been if he were not treated the way he had been.
How old were you when he passed away?
Let me see. He died in 1931.
You were 31, so you were young when he passed away. So
yes.
He passed away early. Okay, I can see how that can be a painful experience. But let me ask you this: would you consider yourself a hardworking man? Would you say you're a hardworking person?
Yes, I am referred to by most of the people who know me as a workaholic.
So if you're a workaholic, maybe because your father sounds like my father. Okay, my dad in Iran ran a he ran Nivea and Max Factor. I don't know if you're familiar with those two. You don't look like somebody that puts makeup on every day, but
no, but I'm familiar with those brands.
So my dad ran Max Factor and Nivea in Iran. In U.S. money, he was making, like comparable to $100,000 a month in Iran. And then he went from Iran when the war happened. Khomeini died 6 weeks later. We escaped. My mother and I and my sister, we went to Germany, lived at a refugee camp, and then we came out here. He had heart attacks after heart attacks, and he worked at a 99-cent store for 15 years in Inglewood, California. Okay.
Right.
And you know how it is, a father-son relationship. It sounds like you love your father as well. I had a very good, till today, he's still alive. Got the knock on wood, he's still with us here. One of the things that I saw, if my dad was born here, my dad would have been a very, very successful man. But sometimes one of the best things he did is bringing me here. So maybe your dad's example to you is why you ended up becoming who you are today, by having that work ethic being passed down to you.
Absolutely.
Where you're just, his legacy is continuing through you.
Yep. And I think that that's something that happened long ago and happens on very deep levels that you're only barely aware of and that you certainly cannot control, or at least I can't.
Sure.
But I'm not upset about it. I really like my father, and I'm grateful for all the things that he did for me.